Okay, I'm going to make a start. So I hope you had a very nice lunch, and welcome to the first of two sessions on the World Happiness Report 2025 edition. So in this session we have three speakers who were each authors on chapters within this year's report, and then in the second session, which is in this room again at 5 p.m, we'll have John Helliwell appearing via Zoom, and two of the other chapter authors as well. And just to give a quick brief introduction, so this is the World Happiness Report 2025, also available online. It's been going since 2012, and it was first set up for a UN high-level meeting in Bhutan, and it proved so popular we've been doing it every year since. We get media coverage all around the world every year, particularly about the rankings of happiness of the different countries. That's what most people know the report for. But actually, the vast bulk of this report is really good quality research done by people from all around the world, and that's what we want to highlight at this conference. So I'm going to hand over now to Lina Marinez, who's going to be talking about her chapter, Living with Others.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks for being here. Our chapter we titled Living with Others, How Household Size and Family Bonds Relates to Happiness. And before starting with the data and the results, I would like to situate the research. This is a chapter pretty much dedicated to understand Latin America subjective well-being. For those who have been working in Latin America, one of the things that puzzles us the most is in Latin America overall, subjective well-being, happiness, life satisfaction, whatever measure you use is very high. But we don't have a high PIB per capita. GDP per capita, sorry. So it is like a paradox, how people in a continent with so many troubles as we have in Latin America ended up to be so happy. Because when you just have the raw measures of any measure of subjective well-being, we reach levels of any Scandinavian country. Part of the research we have been doing is understanding why subjective well-being is so high in Latin America. And one of the reasons that explains the most is the strength of our relationships, starting with the family. So we wanted to contribute something to the discussion in Latin America, understanding how family drives the high satisfaction in the continent. And the other aspect of this research is a concept called familism. Familism is something that underlies very much our relationships. Since the government is weak in so many instances in different countries in Latin America, we rely on family for taking care of children, for taking care of the older, for lending money. So many of the resources that in other countries comes from the government, for us comes from family bonds. The subtext of this analysis is also taking another issue, which is loneliness, particularly in Europe. So we are seeing increasing rates and a focus on why people is lonely and what are the impacts on subjective well-being. We don't tackle that issue directly, but when we compare Latin America and Europe, we want to provide at least some arguments for that discussion. So those are my, sorry, this is a little bit has a delay. Those are my co-authors, Mariano Rojas, Gerardo Leiva, Roberto Castellanos, Margarita Tarragona. So just to give some information about the general statistics about how is the distribution of households. When we see the average family size, we got from Nicaragua, which is a Latin American country, in the average size of the household is about 5 persons, and you go top down to Denmark, which is a little bit less than 2 people per household. the average size family, sorry. And then the other side of seeing this same information is the average single person household in Europe and Latin America. So we go from the lowest, which is Nicaragua. We have a very small rate of people living alone in general in Latin America. The highest is Puerto Rico, and it's about 16%. But if you compare the data with European countries, it's a fairly usual configuration of people living alone. Denmark has the highest in about 38%, almost reaching 40%. Also, when we see what is the average number of people per household in Latin America and Europe, most European countries are concentrated in 1 or 2 people. Most of the households in Latin America goes from 3, 4, 5. It's not quite common for us to live in single households. And I think that one of the measures, the hard measures in which you can represent the disposition of people to live in company is the household size. So we want to dig that. This is the main funding of our research. So if you want to have one punch results is this graph. For both Europe and Latin America, the increase of people in the household increase happiness. And it seems that the sweet spot is 4 people in the household. Usually that configuration is a couple with children, 1 child, 2 children. And also we have in the numbers, we have the life satisfaction. So in Latin America, people living alone, life satisfaction is about 8.2. In Europe, it's about 6.5. One of the things that we find, and we will come back to this finding, is that people in Europe, despite the frequency of living alone, in average, is the people who has the lowest score on life satisfaction. It increases until 4, then it starts to reduces. So this is the main results that we can have comparing Latin America with Europe. This is only information for Mexico. When we ask the people satisfaction with the affective life or economic life, in the affective life, it goes up as the household size increases until about 5 household members in affective life. After that, it starts to reduce. One of the interesting parts of this is living with more people is beneficial for your affective and for your family satisfaction, but not for your financial satisfaction. So the higher the number of people in the household, the less financial satisfaction you will derive, but the higher emotional satisfaction you will have for living with more people. Here we have, this is a question in a scale 0 to 10, how is your satisfaction with family life? And as the household increases, life satisfaction also increases for an average Mexican. And as you can see, this is when we ask in Latin America for the information we have available, the data or the aspect in which people is more satisfied is family satisfaction. And it strongly correlates with many other factors of happiness in the region. Here we start to work with different family compositions. So you have couple with at least 1 children, couple with some child and other relatives, which is an extensive, that's what we call extensive family, when you live with your grandmother or an aunt or someone else in your extended family. Then we have couples without children, single parent households and some relatives, single person households and single parent households. For both Europe and Mexico, people with children, with at least 1 child, is the family composition in which life satisfaction is the highest. For Mexico, it goes to 8.6. For Europe, it goes 7.4. Another important aspect to highlight here is, in general, life satisfaction is higher in Latin America than Europe, after controlling for all the factors we take into account in our model. And that's one of the contributions and part of the research we do in Latin America is trying to explain why we are so happy despite all of the other compositions. For both for Europe and for Latin America, single parent households is the family composition in which people experience less satisfaction. Here it's another of the important findings here. The line you see, we are trying to compare how is happiness for people who has 2 children, it's a couple and 2 children, and how happiness compares in the other dimensions, in the other family compositions we have. As I said, a couple with at least 1 child is the structure, the family structure that provides more happiness. Couples without children are not far, are pretty much similarly happy as those with children. So this is not the case of go and have children. No, people without children is also pretty happy. It is pretty much the same with the standard deviations and the coefficient. It will be practically no difference. One of the things that we found more interesting is single-person households. People living in single-person households are significantly less satisfied with their life, particularly in Europe as compared with Latin America. You will see the number with the different shadow. Well, one is Mexico, the other one is Europe. So this makes us wonder, so why, if people choose so frequently to live alone, if that's a reduction on life satisfaction, why people to continue preferring that type of family composition? Another question for anthropologists, for sociologists, or we have just to dig deeper on that. But one of the things we found in the old trends, not only for developed countries and Europe, but in general in Latin America, more people is choosing to live alone. More people is choosing any other form, or being single or living by themselves, and the highest the PIB of the country, the highest the probability of people living alone. We also find that for both Mexico and Latin America, a single-parent household are also the less happy. So this is the part of the data that I wanted to show. For more information, please go to, by all means, please read the report. It's chapter 4. But I would like to use the time to talk about what it means. Family probably is the best indicator of our disposition to live with others, to live in society, or to live in companionship with other people. And we know by all the possible research we have available that bonding, that having strong relationships is quite an important driver for our life satisfaction. It will be important to ask why then we are preferring so often to live by ourselves, and how that leads to other dimensions of public policy, for instance, being lonely, which needs another type of resources from the government. Case on hand, UK with the solitude ministry, which is happening also in Japan. So probably why is not family the natural choosing alternative for curing our loneliness. The other thing is everything we know about socialization and living with others is learned in the family. We learn from our parents, from our siblings, from the people we live to have relationship with others. So what are the policies, what are the instruments, how we are strengthening the family relationships and the family compositions. Larger households also teach us other things: to be empathic, to collaborate, to trust, to negotiate. I'm not making the case for people to have large households. I'm just showing what the data says and what that in place. The other aspect is it could be the case only for Latin America because, as I mentioned before, the familism. We are pretty much trained and get used to use family to resolve many of the things that the government is unable to provide for us. Childcare, elderly care, financial support, logistics, many of the things that are pretty much resolved through a strong welfare state. We just don't have that, so we have to find another mechanisms. Another part of the discussion that we try to provoke with the chapter is what is happening with the policies that provide that strength that we need in terms of family. Much of the policies focus with productivity, with work, with labor, are in so many ways are detrimental to family bonds and for the structure of the family. We discuss in the chapter the case of Ciudad Juárez, in which many of the industries came into the city, but it increased employment, but decreased the time that parents are able to be with the children to raise them. We are not able to find any kind of causality, but Ciudad Juárez experienced a very detrimental aspects on their quality of life in many different factors. And at least it correlates very strongly with the time that productivity and increase in employment take off on Ciudad Juárez. The other aspect of, not only from this chapter, but in general, what we know about happiness and well-being in Latin America, it is about a sustainable form to be and to promote life satisfaction and subjective well-being in a society as a whole. We take less resources, we don't have a welfare state as strong and demanding so much resources and taxes as other nations, but we are happy. And we have learned to cope with many different circumstances, with a government that performs poorly. And when the ranking come up, every year we usually have Latin American countries scoring very high. This year was Mexico and Puerto Rico, Costa Rica. Costa Rica was 6, Mexico was 10, like, what the hell, just right after Denmark, Finland, Iceland, like, how is those countries just getting so high in the ranking? Well, we don't, in the absence of a government which provide all the services that we need, we have found a way to provide those resources for ourselves. So the case of Latin America might provide some lessons in the long run. We're just starting in the process to understand better how those mechanisms works. There are other things that we are not portraying here, and I don't want to sell a rosy side of what's happening in Latin America. We are a very violent country. We have other type of relationships that we are starting just to tackle and to see how those relationships fits into this bigger picture. But the bottom line is, for us, family is very relevant. The number of people in which we share every day, it's quite important. In one of the sessions that you will see later today is the relevance of eating with others. And in Latin America is the highest frequency of people eating together, either lunch or dinner or breakfast. And that's part of the tradition, that's part of what we do, that's part of the way we socialize. So we have a different structure, and it contributes highly to our subjective well-being. Thank you very much. And I leave it here, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. First question, maybe I missed it, but why did you single out Mexico for many of the statistics comparing Mexico with Europe?
Oh, got it. You just have to touch it. We try to have a larger number of Latin American countries, but we use information collected from national statistical agencies. And the only country that has very comprehensive data on subjective well-being is Mexico. Colombia also collects data, but is not as comprehensive. It hasn't been run for a long period of time as Mexico. Mexico has been collecting information since 2012. Colombia started in 2017 with a smaller battery of questions. There is also some cases in Chile, but in general, the data collection with the robustness that we need for this type of analysis is pretty much located in Mexico. But we are looking forward to expand this to other places in the continent. We have another question over there.
Thank you for your great presentation. I think it's very interesting to compare Latin America with Europe, quite different ways of living and looking at quality of life. And I was wondering if you looked at different European regions, because within Europe we have very, very different cultural styles, very different ways of looking at quality of life as well. And I was wondering if what the comparison would look like if you picked out Southern Europe, especially Italy and Spain, our more familistic welfare states, where you encounter maybe similar issues with lacking childcare support, therefore the strong family bonds, people moving out at a later stage because they stay home for a longer time, especially because the Southern European countries are less happy than the Northern ones. Yeah, did you look at that specifically?
We don't, and I will explain you why. There is, in general, when you get into the subjective well-being literature, most of the literature is heavily concentrated in Europe. We know very little about Latin America in general. We didn't have the information to make those regional differences with Latin America and with Europe. And if we had the focus of doing it in Europe, it would be a study of Europe culture, in which none of us is from Europe. I am well located to talk about Latin America, but I don't know about the family compositions of the culture on Europe. That's one side. But the relevant part of that is we want to focus on Latin America and to provide the general of the broader comparison for the region. I think that in Latin America, we need more of this evidence, and we need to bring it more for the policy discussion. What we are doing as scholars, as a group of researchers, is try to bring this conversation at a government level, like why this is important and why we need to provide other type of policies. So for the richness of the analysis, we will have to pretty much decline of the richness of the analysis for the policy side. So we are more advocating from the policy side of this to situate this conversation in the region. You're welcome.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Corin. I'm Corin Blanc. I'm a first-year PhD student, and I had the chance to write this article, this chapter for the World Happiness Report, Trusting Others, How Unhappiness and Social Distrust Explain Populism, with Yann Algan and Claudia Senik. When we thought about this chapter, we tried to give a justification to the broad theme of the World Happiness Report being caring and sharing. And our idea is that caring, sharing, trusting might have structural consequences in the society through new voting behaviors. What we observe in Western democracies is the rise of anti-system and populist political victories. So we have numerous examples: the Brexit, Trump 2 times, the relative victory of the AfD in the last German legislative elections, the Rassemblement National in France. Many examples that are mainly coming from the loss of confidence of part of the population in traditional political parties, a loss of confidence that is due to economic inequalities, economic insecurities, a social ladder being frozen, many causes. But something that we could not understand is that why the political basis of far-right and far-left parties, so 2 extremes of the political spectrum, do look similar in some ways. The income is quite the same for this population. There are blue-collar workers, and traditional class-based divides could can no today longer explain why these voters choose either one side or the other of the political spectrum. We also know that these populations have a lower level of life satisfaction than the others, but alone life satisfaction cannot explain why still some do choose one side or the other of the political spectrum, and that's what we wanted to overcome in this chapter by adding a new variable that we all know, but being social trust or interpersonal trust. We use the terms the same way. All right. So we built this two-dimensional model of political behavior using two inputs, life satisfaction and social trust. And then we want to know how these two inputs affect voting behaviors, using also intermediate variables or moderate variables, being normative values, political, cultural, and economic values that I will explain a bit more in details later. Going through the results, what we understand and what we show in the chapter is that people having lower life satisfaction levels than the rest of the population are attracted to anti-system parties, far left or far right. Then it is trust, social trust, that makes the separation between these populations. Those with high trust are more associated with progressive values, voting for far left parties, and those with lower social trust are more associated with conservative values and so voting for far right parties. So that's exactly what I said just here. We show also how life satisfaction and trust are, of course, associated, and how do they shape values, so political, cultural, and economic values, and how it affects voting behaviors. What we also wanted to study is the longer trend of happiness and social trust, because if we see this rise of populism in Western countries, Western democracies, then we should see through our model a drop in life satisfaction levels and a drop also in social trust, and that's exactly what we document here. And finally, to fit into the theme of the World Happiness Report, we highlight political implications of presence and absence of caring and sharing practices. So to be quick on data and methodology, we use multiple surveys and databases that I think you all know. The Gallup-Whirlpool, the ESS, that was also used in the family chapter. We use the GSS for the United States because it gives us longer trends, especially on trust. And also we use the American National Election Studies to have data on what people voted in primary elections of both Republican and Democrats. Primary elections. What I want to stress here is that we focus only on Western democracies because of the difficulty to link life satisfaction and trust to voting behaviors in other countries, developing countries. There is a lack of data on this subject. And also it was quite complicated for us to make a clear classification of the parties in these countries that we know a bit less. We could do build on a classification that was already done in several other studies for Western countries. And for the methodology is quite straightforward. So how the chapter is constructed and how I will present it is that first we examine how life satisfaction and social trust do influence normative values. Then we also show how these normative values translate into voting behaviors. And finally, we look at the direct effect of our inputs to our outcomes, voting behaviors. And at the end of the presentation, I will also show you the longer trends I talked about. So jumping to political values, here what we look at is satisfaction with democracy. We divide the population into 4 categories: those with high life satisfaction and high social trust, those with high life satisfaction, low social trust, low life satisfaction, high trust, and low life satisfaction, low trust. What we did to, what we used as the cutoff is the median of our inputs. So, for example, for life satisfaction, we have half of the population which is above 7, half below, and it is the median for social trust is 6, around 6, in our countries. Then what we do is that we want to know what is taking as a baseline high life satisfaction and high trust. How do these sections of the population, how are they satisfied or not with democracy? And what we show here is that it is life satisfaction which is key to predict political discontent, so being dissatisfied with the democracy you experience. For example, if we take the populations with high social trust, so the green and the blue point, what we see is that if we go through the green, so high life satisfaction, to the blue, low life satisfaction, there is a huge drop in satisfaction with democracy, both in the United States and in Western Europe. It is the same story with the low social trust population. How does it translate in voting behaviors? What we see is that people voting for far left and for far right parties in Western Europe are far more dissatisfied with democracy than the rest of the population. It is also true for trusting politicians, trusting the legal system, their experience, trusting the national parliament. For European integration, it's a bit more complicated since left and far left voters are quite fond of the EU integration. But people voting for far left and far right are more dissatisfied than the rest. Then we look at cultural values. So we take positive attitudes towards the LGBT community and positive attitude towards immigration in general. What we see is that now it is social trust that is key to understand the division in the society. People with high trust will be more positive towards the community we study here than those with low social trust. We could see it by looking at maybe the green and orange points, so high life satisfaction. We only take those people. What we see is that going through from the high social trust to low social trust, so green to orange, there is a huge drop in positive attitudes towards these communities. All right, sorry. For economic values, what we see is that it is exactly the same story. Social trust is key here. We take reducing income inequalities as a proxy for economic values, and people with higher social trust are more keen to implementing policies that reduce income inequalities. And how does it translate in terms of voting behaviors? What we see is that people voting for far-right parties are against the LGBT community being free to live. They are against immigration, of course. They are not more in favor of reducing income inequalities, even though these people are those who would benefit the most from such policies. And they do not believe in the equality of opportunities. While people voting for left and far left parties have more progressive values for both communities, LGBT and immigrants, and of course they are more in favor of reducing income inequalities. All right, so what we wanted to show here is that life satisfaction and low life satisfaction gives an idea of why people switch to extreme parties of the political spectrum, far left or far right, but alone it cannot explain why they choose one or the other. And social trust, through having conservative or progressive values, makes a separation in this population. So if we only take life satisfaction and social trusts in Western Europe, and that we put them in our model, that's what we get. So as predicted, people with lower life satisfaction in the population do vote for far left or for far right parties. People with higher social trust in this population will vote for far left parties, while people voting for far right parties are have both low life satisfaction and low social trust. In the precedent graph, it was only mean on average. Here, we regress life satisfaction and trust on the voting behaviors using socio-demographic controls, so gender, age, income, where you live, urban or rural areas, education, and what we see is that it holds. People, for example, people voting for far left parties have a lower life satisfaction, but a higher trust in others. It's only Western Europe. What is fascinating is that if you do that for one specific country in Western Europe, France, Sweden, Spain, Italy, the UK, Germany, whatever, you will find the same result. However, for the US, it's a bit more complicated because of the political structure. There are only two parties, right? The Republicans and Democrats. So there is not really a far right or far right or far left party. Our model holds for the 2016 election. People voting for Hillary Clinton were more satisfied and more trustful, and people with voting for Donald Trump were less than the others. However, for 2020, it's a bit more complicated. Yeah, but what we wanted to stress here is mainly about abstention. People not voting anymore in the US are those who have the same characteristics in terms of life satisfaction and trust than those who vote for far-right parties in Western Europe. We went a bit further on the study of these abstainers. What we show is that they have lower level of life satisfaction and trust. For life satisfaction, they have also lower levels of job satisfaction, family satisfaction. They feel a lot more alone than the others. That made me think that maybe those who do not vote are those also who eat alone, right? They do not trust institutions, the police, the federal government, local government. They do not trust family and neighbors, etc. So it's a bit of complicated situation. We also looked at the primary elections of both Democrat and Republican parties. What we see is that the Sanders voters in the Democrat election, the Sanders voters are quite unlike the far left or left voters in Western Europe, with low life trust and a higher low life satisfaction and higher social trust. Sorry. In 2016, Trump voters had low social trust. They have higher levels in 2020 because he's the only candidate in the Republican election. So the voters were a lot more heterogeneous than previously. And yeah, for Clinton and Biden, higher satisfaction and higher trust. We also digged a bit on the values of these people. What we see is that Democrats have more progressive values into an open society, higher trust into strangers. Something interesting to see that was Sanders voters are more trustful into strangers or people they meet for the first time than trustful towards their own family or friends. Own family, not friends, sorry. So yeah, there is a clear distinction between people you trust or not. Republicans, it's the other way around, with hierarchical trust. So you trust your family or friends, the close ties, but not really outside the bubble. And so to complete this framework, what we see is that we have our separation at one point in the time, but if we observe this rise of populism, that's because we should see a drop in life satisfaction and social trust since the beginning of the century. When looking at life satisfaction, we take here the Gallup World Poll survey as data. Is of course a huge drop in life satisfaction in the US since 26, from 7.25 to 6.5 in 2023. It's a bit more of a stagnation if we take the mean between Western Europe countries. However, we see a drop since 2018, 2019 in these countries. For trust, what we take here as a variable is the question, do you have someone you can count on in the Gallup World Poll? What we see is that at the beginning of the period, so 2006, almost 95% of the population felt that they had someone they can count on. And at the end of the period, it is only 86% of the population, meaning that there is almost 15% of the population that does think they have no one they can count on. And we see the same drop in Western Europe. We made a heterogeneous study just to see who is the most impacted by this drop. What we see is that young adults are the most affected, especially in the US when observing life satisfaction, and among women. Women had higher level at the beginning of the period, so they fall from higher, if I may say. Education people, so it's the people with lower medium education that show the steepest decline, and people who are the most modest also face the largest drop in social trust in both Western Europe and the United States. So to conclude, we have this dissatisfaction, this drop in life satisfaction that drives anti-system sentiment and populist vote. Social trust, it is what determines, at least in part, why some people choose far left or far right or abstain during elections. Restoring social trust is essential to democratic resilience. And Richard said again this phrase a bit earlier, it's not the economy stupid, it's well-being stupid now. Thank you. I don't know if there are any questions. Yeah?
Hi. So my question is there, when we look at Western countries at the national level, and we compare different countries, is there any difference for countries with an history and a culture of multipartism versus bipartism in your data?
In Europe. So in Europe, we only looked at countries that have the same political structure, if I may say, with where we can cut the political parties with far left, left center, right and far right. What we struggled a bit with is the fact that some parties are considered as center right or center left, and then we had to make a choice between putting them in the left or the center maybe classification. But sadly, we only looked at the US with only two parties. For this study. Yeah.
I have a quick question and maybe a follow-up comment. Did you measure social trust in all of these analyses using the question, do you have someone to count on? No, sorry.
All right. For Western Europe, we mainly used the ESS question, interpersonal trust. So on a scale of 1 to 10, of how much you trust the others. When we make the long trend, I guess this is your question. When we make the long trend of this question, it is also stagnation for part of the population. And there is a drop in several countries.
Okay, I just asked because the question on whether you have someone you can count on is more social capital than it is actually social trust. So I wouldn't phrase it wouldn't use the same term. And then maybe a hint, maybe you already know it. There's a paper by Peter Isaacson, I guess is his name, and colleagues called In Pursuit of Happiness, Life Satisfaction Drives Political Support. And they have this nice argument, but I see you nodding, you know the paper. You don't? Okay. They make the argument that it's for so long in political science, people looked at life satisfaction as an outcome, as something we should explain somehow by policies and how government function, whatever. But instead it's useful because they say people use their own life satisfaction as a measure to assess whether they think that the government is doing a good job. So if my life is good, apparently the government is doing okay for me, so I will evaluate the government better and I will vote for the government again, I will trust the political system. And they show this in this paper. I can send it to you if you don't know it, because I think it fits very, very well in your argument.
Something we maybe add in this chapter is the fact that some people are using also trust to evaluate policies and economic policies. We try to argue a bit in this direction that people with lower trust would be against redistribution, because they would think that they will pay taxes but not the others, right? And that it will be a cost for them but not the others. And so, but goes, that fits very well. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Should I go? Hello everyone, thanks very much for being here. It's a real pleasure to be presenting this work at ISQOLS. So I'm Michael Blanc, I'm the founder and director of the Happy Lives Institute. I am, for my sins, a philosopher. I know that makes me a little bit out of place amongst all you good social scientists. And I'm also a research fellow in philosophy at the Wellbeing Research Centre, Oxford. And so this chapter is about the question you're all thinking about late at night. How can I make the biggest difference to other people with my charitable giving? So you'll be relieved to know you're finally going to get answers to that question. So the theme of pro-sociality and what we can do for others, this is what we are thinking about. Okay, so every year about $500 billion is given to charity. That's a GDP which, believe it or not, is even larger than that of Luxembourg's. So the GDP the size of Austria. So it's about 0.5% of global GDP. It's quite a lot of money. But even so, there are many good causes out there, and no one has infinite money. And so there's a question of, how can you make the biggest difference with the money you have? And people say that money can't buy happiness, but here we turn that on its head. We in fact are going to show how money can buy happiness for other people, and identify using wellbeing science, identify the best buys that have been found so far. So I just added this in. This happened to be in my accommodation. You can't make everyone happy. You're not pizza. And this is the challenge with giving to charities. There's only so much that you can do, whether or not you are pizza. Okay, so here's the key findings of Chapter 8 from this year's World Happiness Report. So charities can and should, we argue, be assessed in terms of well-being life years, or wellbees. You'll hear more about that in a moment. And we conduct the first ever global review of charity cost effectiveness in terms of well-being. So if you weren't excited before, surely you are now. As far as I know, there has been no global comparison of charities in terms of cost effectiveness. So this is the first, and even better, it's done in terms of well-being, which obviously we all know and love. And the surprising result we find is that some charities are hundreds or thousands of times better than others. And this contrasts with people's expectations, where we think that charities don't know, one charity is about as good as another. Our sample didn't include any large, well-known charities, which we call mangoes, or multi-armed NGOs, or typical acts of charity. So we looked at all the research that's been done so far, and then we thought, well, what are we missing? So we looked at these other things. So we're going to sort of tentatively say why we think almost any charity you've heard of is probably not amongst the best buys. So the conclusion for donors, which could and indeed perhaps should mean all of you, you can increase your impact enormously by no extra effort yourself, by choosing where you give. And if that isn't a good news story, then what is? And a conclusion for researchers, which may also be some of you, there's a lot of research you can do. We're really at the start of this. So this is work from my team and I. A couple of them are sitting over there. And so the Happy Lives Institute, we are we're sort of a quasi-academic institute. We're a registered charity. We started in 2019. I was interested in this question of which charities create the most happiness for our money. It didn't seem like there had been work comparing charities. And so we really got set up to answer the question, which we're now able, a few years later, and with the help of work from others, able to answer. So we look for the most cost-effective ways globally to increase well-being, and we work with donors and decision makers who want to have a greater impact. Okay, so structure of the talk, motivation methods, why give effectively. You'll be pleased to know you're going to get a little bit of philosophy today, just to mix things up. Why and how to assess charity impact on well-being. We'll do some results and discussion on this literature review with some limitations, and then implications for donors and researchers. So why give? So imagine you are walking past a shallow pond, and I forgive those of you who have heard this hundreds or thousands of times, but I suspect not all of you will. So you're walking past a shallow pond, you see a child drowning. You can go in and save the child, but the cost of ruining your nice conference suit and your shoes, should you do so? And you ask people this question, everyone says, of course you must jump in and save the child's life. What kind of monster would not do that? And this example comes from Peter Singer in his paper Famine, Affluence, Morality from 1972, and he draws an analogy. If you're prepared to sacrifice your shoes or your suit to save a child's life, why shouldn't you give some money to charity? Isn't it very structurally similar? You can make a small sacrifice which has a big difference to others. If we can prevent something bad from happening without sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, we ought to do so. So that's the kind of, bad cop moralistic argument for giving. And the good cop argument is that giving makes us happier, it makes us feel more connected, our lives are meaningful. So depending upon whether you want to feel good about yourself or motivate yourself with shame and self-criticism, you've got two options there. Why give effectively? So this is kind of a simple idea. Imagine there are some buildings burning, and you get to the building and you see that there are 5 children in one and 1 child in another. You've already borne the cost of running all the way there, and you're going to go into one building either way. Presumably you should save the 5 rather than the 1. So if you're going to give effectively. Okay, so I've got a couple of sort of objections to this, how motivated should we be to try and not just give, but give effectively. Is that we're just not motivated to do this. This is not how humans are construed. We don't care about doing good impartially or just improving well-being generally. We care about particular causes. We want to support a cancer charity or whatever it is. So if this is you, then I would ask you to think about the question of, well, why do you think that thing matters? Is it that you particularly care about that cause, so a particular kind of cancer charity, or is the real problem the suffering that causes, the loss in well-being to the person? And if so, why not just focus directly on the well-being? It could well be, and hopefully it is true for some people here, that making the biggest difference to people's well-being is the cause that's really close to your heart. So I know that's kind of true for me. That's why I do what I do, and I find extremely motivating. So considering making that something that you're passionate about. And if you feel yourself drawn between different causes, you can split your donations. So do some of the the thing you're passionate about, and some of the thing you think is kind of effective, but maybe less emotionally exciting. So an objection which comes up lots when I talk to people about giving to charities, they say, isn't giving just for the rich? You know, the top 1%, they should give. But, you know, little Joe like me, it's not, I don't have a responsibility to give. So to address that, you're probably richer than you realise. Looking at the global income distribution, if you earn, I should have converted this into euros. Fortunately, the pound and the euro are worth almost the same, so we can just take them as close to parity. If you earn £33,000, you're in the top 2% globally. If you earn £43,000, you're in the top 1% globally. So I imagine many of you are in the top 1% of the current population. But if you think about this in a broader term, probably 117 billion odd people have ever existed. So if you're in the top 2% today, you are on the top 1% richest people in history. And if the top 1% richest people in history aren't motivated or responsible for helping others, then who is? Okay, so one, how to quantify charity impact on well-being. This is a point Richard Laird was making earlier, a point that's going to be coming up in the next session when we've actually got a debate on sort of single versus unidimensional approaches to well-being. But a sort of simple thought is that when we care about what's good, income, health don't matter in themselves. What we really care about is well-being. So, if we want to give to charity because we care about well-being, then let's just measure well-being directly. And so here our tool, which we are proponents but not inventors of, is the wellbeing. So imagine, and I'm sure this is difficult for some of you to imagine, you're asked, how satisfied are you with your life, 0 to 10? So if you went up by 1 point for 1 year, that would be 1 wellbeing. So this is the method which, at least notionally, the UK Treasury uses, and there's a few other organisations, including perhaps some of you are here, who use the wellbeing. And the advantage is you can compare all different sorts of ways you affect someone's quality of life, and then you have this kind of single comparative unit. For context, so how much is kind of one well-be? So being depressed is about a 0.3 decrease in life satisfaction. Being unemployed is about a 0.5% decrease. A doubling of income is about 0.2% increase on this 0 to 10 scale. And being married is associated with a 0.3% increase a year after getting married. So I'm getting married in 3 weeks. I hope it's larger than that, but I expect this will merely be the least cost-effective party I ever throw. But enough about me. Okay, so how does this work? So there's now kind of a few organisations that are doing this. It's kind of straightforward. You try and look at the evidence on particular interventions. So you might look at evidence published in the existing academic literature. You might look at information from the charities themselves. You gather the evidence. You try and look at the effects over time. You account for spillovers, not just on the direct participant, but also on members of the household. There are various kind of adjustments for internal and external validity. Which as a philosopher I don't know anything about, but my team know about them, or so they tell me. And then at the end, you're trying to calculate cost effectiveness. How much well-being do you get out for the stuff that goes in? And now the results. So this research on assessing charities in terms of how much happiness they produce per dollar, this is all very new. We think we were the first people in the world to be doing it. I think I might have been the first person to do it in my PhD a couple of years before that. But it's all, this is kind of hot off the press. Lots of the research comes from us at the Happy Lives Institute, but there are also some other good people who are producing this. It's the State of Life, Pro Bono Economics, Christian Krekel and colleagues at the London School of Economics. So I tell people, and no one's been excited about this apart from me yet, but I tell people that the UK is a world leader in happiness research, even if not actual happiness. And so there's this kind of set of research coming out, and it's all very new. And what do we find? Okay, so here's a table. I'm now going to take you through every column and row of this table. No, don't worry, I won't. So this is a table summing up the charities you can find in the World Happiness Report itself. I'm just going to kind of take you to the results and some pictures. Okay, so here's what we got. So this is charities assessed in their cost to produce a wellbe. So a wellbe is the 1 point increase for one person for 1 year. And then we've got there's a number of different exciting things going on here. So we've got the name of the charity on the far left, and square brackets, we've got what it does, whether it's in a low and middle income country or a high income country. And then we've also got assessments by evaluators. So who did the numbers come from? And we have a sort of blobs indicating depths of analysis, so medium, shallow, and depth, which you can take as kind of a proxy for uncertainty. There's lots of different types of uncertainty going on here, and it's not all statistical. It's also kind of more like larger sense of uncertainty, so that we don't have confidence intervals to present people with. And what we were trying to do was just to collect all the estimates that had been done by people already. We haven't tried to harmonize these. We're just taking what's already out there and bringing that together, and then trying to make a bit of sense of it. And the thing that really sticks out is that there are enormous differences in cost effectiveness. So at the top, we've got an organization which is Pure Earth, which does, it's even written in here, advocacy for reducing lead exposure in cosmetics. And so lead is, as we know, very dangerous. We don't allow it to be in our cars anymore. And so this organization, they campaign to get governments to take it out of stuff. And we have some evidence indicating that lead has a sort of an effect in children which lasts a couple of decades, and the effect is sort of small per year, but it's over a long time. Then we have, say, friendship bench and strong minds, both of which provide task-shifted therapy. So many people around the world suffer from depression in places like Uganda or Zimbabwe. If you wanted to find a therapist, you couldn't. If you wanted to, if they existed, you would probably struggle to afford one. And so these organizations will run courses of therapy delivered by trained volunteers for sort of $20 or $50 a person. And then moving further down, we've got things like cash transfers, and then we start to get into the high-income country charities like the Royal Voluntary Service, Action for Happiness. And then we've got sort of things further down like Football Beyond Borders, which provides sort of sports coaching. And the differences are really very large. And what's really seems to be driving this is not just, I mean, the cost effectiveness of charity is going to depend upon what it does. There's not sort of anything more magical to it, but it's really the low income country versus high income country where the needs are greater and targeted at particular people with particular problems and where costs are lower. So I've got the same thing presented the other way around. This is wellbees created per $1,000 donated. This actually we think we're actually not sure what's the best way to present this, because the problem with the previous one is that if you have some stuff which is not very effective, it compresses artificially the kind of the better stuff, and this doesn't do that. And so hopefully this makes it clear that there are, you know, even within sort of similar parts of the world, there are still very big differences, and the differences between kind of best and worst and best in the middle are really quite large. Okay, so our sort of slightly made up figure here is that it's sort of if you give to a top charity, your money will go 150 times further. So that comes from the difference between the average of the top 5 and then the average of the UK charities we have. And these differences are, it's just very large. I've got another slide pointing out the differences are large, helpfully with some figures between these. So, you know, between kind of most and least effective in our sample was nearly 1,000 times. And that's just the stuff where there'd already been existing estimates. And then we extended that. And I actually will talk about that in a moment. So big differences. One thing you might worry about is this just an artifact of some research teams being more conservative or more generous than others? So we write about that in the chapter. We think that's probably not the case, despite what this says. So the organizations or the teams have different selection processes. They're looking at different organizations. There's no organization which has been assessed twice by the same people. So we're looking at different kinds of organizations. There's only a few evaluations that have been done per evaluator. So in Happy Lives Institute, we've done a dozen, but across the others, it's 3 or 4. So it's very small N. And the most important thing is the evaluators are trying to do different things. So in the Happy Lives Institute, we are looking for the stuff which gives you most bang for your buck, and the other organizations are kind of looking at or being asked to assess projects which are mostly happening in the UK or they've been requested to do. So it's not the same approach there. Okay. Are these results new or surprising? So can you put your hand up if you've heard the claim that the best charities are 100 times more cost effective than the average? Okay, so that's a few people. I notice they're clustered over here in the keynotes corner. Right, so if you've also heard of the effective altruism movement, this is a claim that kind of has been made that you give your money to the best charity, it's 100 times more cost effective. And so are we just saying something which other people have already claimed and shown? And the answer is, well, not enormously. So there has been some previous research looking at how cost effectiveness differs for interventions. And so something which has been pointed to before is that if you look at health interventions, this is from the Disease Control Priorities Project, if you look at health interventions in global health, some of them are loads more cost effective than others. And this is measured in terms of disability adjusted life years DALYs rather than wellbees. But this is not of charities. To get a best to an average, you need a representative sample of the thing you're interested in to get the average. And so there has been no global assessment of charities in any sense. So the claim that, okay, some charities are much better than others is the previous evidence was indicative. So we think this is the strongest evidence so far of radical differences in charity cost effectiveness. And also this is surprising to the public, which, depending upon your preferences, you may or may not consider yourselves part of. So when you ask the public how much, what's the ratio of cost effectiveness between the best charity and the average charity, the answers are around 1 to 3. So we did a sample of this. We found it was 3. And in a poll of charity experts, I did wonder if they should be in inverted commas there, given what evidence was this claim based on. But sort of charity experts believed that the best charities were 100 times the average, and we find the result seems to be larger, 150 times even larger. 150 is possibly conservative. So, how am I doing for time? Okay. So that's looking at the sort of a summary of the research which has been done so far. But you might think, well, that was 24 charities, and I've never heard of any of these charities that you're mentioning. So what about charities like Save the Children, Oxfam, the Salvation Army, Doctors Without Borders, all these sorts of things? So how good are they? How should we think about those? So now I'm going to talk to you about mangoes. So that the mango problem is that the challenge with basically all big charities is that they are mangoes. So this is a term we made up, multi-armed NGOs, which means they do lots of different programs in different areas. When we looked at Oxfam, they had 700 programs running across the world. And this is in contrast with the charities we're looking at, which are FONGOs, which is focused NGOs, which kind of do one thing. And here's the problem with mangoes and why we think they're unlikely to be the best buys. So this is a bit kind of more theory than evidence. So kind of a challenge with this when we came to look at them to think, okay, we see that Oxfam does 700 programs. How are we possibly going to assess all of this? I mean, it's a lot of work to work out how the cost effectiveness of one program. 700. I mean, it's just very hard to know what impact your money has going to a large charity, or just if it's doing so many things. A kind of a more sort of sharper worry is about dilution. So the impact of a charity is just going to be the sum total of the individual programs it runs. There's nothing more to it. So if you've got one good program and you introduce lots of other less good programs, assuming you're confident in the cost effectiveness, then what that's going to do is reduce your average cost effectiveness. The average cost effectiveness of the marginal further dollar is lower if you put in lots of less good stuff. And so there's sort of a mathematical challenge here of if you do lots and lots of programs and some are good and some are bad, how could you be more cost effective than an organization which is just doing one thing really well? It's a challenge called fungibility. So if you're a kind of a big organization, if money goes in one area, then does that mean the organization will actually put money towards that, or will it sort of shuffle around its internal budget? That's a sort of a general concern, but it's more of a concern if an organization is larger and it has kind of more pots and arms it's dealing with. And the final is about prioritization. So imagine you were running a big charity and you saw what you've seen just now, recognizing there are large differences in cost effectiveness. You might think, cripes, I should probably mothball some of my less cost effective programs so I'm getting more impact for the world and from my donors per dollar. So there's something puzzling about why would you want to run lots of different programs? If you think some are better than others, then why not prioritize? So there's kind of a question there. So there were a couple of things that that we could estimate from kind of more typical acts of charity. So we found a couple of studies looking at homelessness. So we're kind of calling these hypothetical because it's not tied. These are sort of research studies rather than tied to a particular organisation. So a couple of programs relating to cash transfers and sort of housing interventions. And then there are some data on the wellbeing effects. If you want more detail on actually on all of these particular things as to how we got the numbers, it's in the World Happiness Report. And so it seems like helping the homeless is quite difficult to do cost effectively. And then we also have guide dogs for the blind. So it costs sort of nearly $200,000 to train a guide dog. So we just looked at this is from the UK, but if you're looking at just the number of guide dogs that get trained and then the running costs of the organisation, the per person benefits of having a guide dog are about 1 point on your 0 to 10 scale. So it's an enormous benefit per person. But as this indicates, cute, but very expensive. And so what we're suggesting here is that you should think about giving with your head and your heart, because by giving with your head, you're able to make so much of a larger difference to people's well-being. And surely that is what matters. So implications for donors. We exist to try and help people have more impact. That's the point. So we publish sort of questionably detailed research, needlessly detailed perhaps, into different charities. We make that all public, and then we give a list of recommendations, and we quantify them in terms of wellbees. And all this stuff is, we think, new and exciting and hopefully helpful. So you can make use of it in your capacity as a donor. So yeah, so because charities vary so enormously in terms of cost effectiveness, you can make a much larger difference to others at no extra cost for yourself, and we've done the work for you. So one way to pull that out is that imagine someone said to you, oh, I've just given 200,000 euros to charity. You'd think, wow, that's an incredible amount. That could be your whole life savings. Why did you do that? But then it turns out that they say they gave the money to a sort of an average charity, but if they gave the money to one of the most effective charities, they could have the same impact for 1,000 euros. So I think most of us would rather do one than the other, and that's the result of, and the impact we can have being so different is a result of just the peculiarity of the way the world is. So in the chapter, we anticipate some, thanks Barry, we anticipate some questions or objections. So how much should I give? You know, if I'm trying to maximize well-being, shouldn't I give everything away until, you know, I've got nothing left but the clothes I'm wearing? We think that the most sensible amount to give is the amount you can sustain. We think it's more important it's less important to give more than it is to give better. So by changing where you give, you can have enormously more impact. But probably most of us, unless you're giving nothing, you couldn't increase the amount you give by 100 times. And as a concrete suggestion, we suggest people give 1% of their income each year. We see that as kind of the altruistic equivalent of doing exercise 3 times a week or eating 5 fruit and vegetables. It's a kind of a manageable target for most people, but yet where a small amount of effort makes a really big difference. Will giving make you happier? Maybe up to a point. If you probably give some of your money away, maybe not if you give all of it away. But also we think that's not necessarily the best reason to do it. I think the reason we should give our money is because we want to be decent people, and we have a moral duty to help others. And I think we should help other people even if it makes us less happy. But it's convenient that it does seem like altruism is its own reward. So you might notice that with lots of things we haven't covered, we're really just comparing charities which have a life-improving effect on people where there is data to support that. And we don't particularly apologise for that. We're very interested in data, so we're examining the things which are easiest to start with. And there's a challenge in thinking, okay, you can do some good now, or you can do something which has diffuse effects on the environment over a longer time. These are challenging questions. These questions are not specific to trying to use well-being. If you were just caring about any measure of value you might use instead, you're still going to run into these issues. So these aren't problems which are particularly for us. I already give to a particular charity. Is it wrong for me to stop? I sort of understand the concerns people have, and I think the answer is not necessarily. If you're the reason you were giving to charities is because you wanted to make a difference to others, and it turns out that someone comes along, stands in front of you at a conference and tells you you can make a much bigger difference to others by switching where you give, and you want to make a bigger difference, then you will make a bigger difference to people as a result. But if you're particularly attached to something, then you can think about splitting your donations. Maybe you give some to the sort of effective but maybe unexciting things, and you give some to your passion projects. I'm sure this is a question you were all wondering, which is, are you offering golden wellbeing tickets to give to a charity of your choice? So the answer is yes. And now I'm engaging my stunt. So if you can collect these from down here, you can also find them outside. So there we are. Yes. Okay. So at the Happy Lives Centre, we are running a giving game. So a donor has given us some money, which has been allocated to everyone at the conference. You can take your ticket to Ben, who's the man also wearing the charming hat, and you will get an allocation of between $10 and $500 to give to a charity from a list of charities. And we're doing this and this is real money. Some people have been confused about this. They thought it's a hypothetical, but no, it's real money. I'm wearing this hat for humorous effect, but this is serious altruism here. Yes, so please do come take a ticket here, and then you can come and talk to us afterwards. I thought I might have challenged you as people interested in well-being to put your money where your mouth is and give to charities. But in fact, I'm merely asking you to put someone else's money where your mouth is and think about charity impact in terms of well-being. Okay, what can researchers do? This may interest some more of you more. So this is the first slew of results from a new field. A huge amount more research is needed. Very few things have been assessed. If you think of this like a map, this is just a few points on the map filled in. There are kind of lots of issues with kind of missing really excellent data. There are familiar methodological challenges to deal with, which suddenly become acute as you're really trying to think about what to do. So which measure to use, comparability between people. These are no longer academic issues. These are getting these theoretical issues right has an impact on who gets helped, who and how much good is done. And there are challenges with extending this framework. So the well-being stuff, I think about like a train, is kind of very powerful in a particular direction, but how does it expand? So this is a case where there is lots of high-impact research you can do. And I know lots of well-being researchers look at kind of causes and correlates of well-being, but I would kind of encourage you to think about prioritization. How can resources be used to make a larger difference? And we've got a stack of research projects which we don't have capacity for. So I will stop there. So that's the results of the chapter. We were exploring the use of well-being life years to compare different charities, do the first global comparison, and we find that some charities are much, much more cost-effective than others, and that has implications for us as donors and as researchers and more generally. So thank you very much.
So thank you for this very useful presentation. I have a question though. So if you are concerned about efficiency, and considering that good tax systems are much more efficient than charity systems, for example, if you compare the Nordic countries with good tax system, with the United States, which are heavy on charity, the Nordic country do better on almost any social statistics that you can think of. So if good tax system is more efficient than charity, why do you not promote tax system rather than charity if your primary concern is efficiency?
Yeah, so this is in kind of literature, this is sometimes known as the sort of systemic change critique of, okay, so I've pointed out some charities. So, okay, here's a charity which provides cash transfers to very poor people. Here's one which provides mental health treatment to people with depression. And the response is, why not try and kind of change some bigger aspect of society, like, overthrow capitalism or abolish property rights, or I'm not saying you're saying any of those things, but kind of deal with sort of structural problems. And there's a question of, well, one, I'm not sure I have the power to do that. And if if I had $10 billion, I might think differently than if I'm working with donors when we're moving some millions of dollars a year. But also, it's just remains to be proven that these things are more cost effective. So I mean, we come up with these things because these are things where we can really evaluate them in kind of a meaningful way with data and look at the cost effectiveness. But when you get to things like comparing direct intervention charities to systemic change charities, it's more like apples to oranges. And really what you choose is depends upon the sort of subjective judgments you make. If donors want to focus on some larger change, I don't think they're necessarily wrong, but it's just not something that we can sort of meaningfully shine a light on with evidence. And yeah, it's an open question which of any of the different systemic change things might be better. I know who says it's tax, maybe it could be the environment, it could be all sorts of other things.
I just want to add to this point really quickly. I think it is a good discussion whether this should be solved through charity or through tax, but I see one example right now where charities are necessary, for instance, when countries don't allow for something like abortion. And there are charities that help women to get abortions in countries where abortions are not legal or made impossible. And this wouldn't be solvable through a tax system, but that's just a side comment. I have a question about how you estimate the wellbees. How do you know how much well-being someone gets for how long when they get a guidance dog?
Yeah, so we do secondary research. We will rely on a kind of existing primary research done by the people. So to give you an example, we did a systematic review and meta-analysis of cash transfers to people who are living on a couple of dollars a day. And there we relied on lots of randomized control trials where you get some people get cash and some people don't. And then we look at subjective well-being outcomes over time and then trying to put those together. So the sort of development economics and global mental health literature have quite a lot of randomized control trials to rely on. So in some sense, for kind of us who are looking in low-income countries, it can be a bit easier to find causal data than it is if you're doing charity analysis in the UK, where there's less sort of donor pressure to see what works, and so there's less data as a result. Oh, yes, at the back, yeah.
Thank you. I was wondering one thing, and you touched on it, but maybe you could explain a little bit more. What do you think about the implications of optimizing for effectiveness? Because one thing that struck me was that charities operating in low-income countries are much more effective. You could conclude from that we should stop all charities or stop donating to charities operating in high-income countries, but since most of us probably are from high-income countries, that could affect our neighbors. So could you maybe extend a little bit more? Yeah,
so this is my last response. So, I mean, what I started by saying with is that tragically there are many good causes, and we can't help everyone. So in giving to one thing, there is a choice about what to prioritize. I mean, the same for policy making. There are just not unlimited resources. So what is a sensible thing to do in that response? I think it's to try and have the biggest impact that you can, or at least have a bigger impact. And so if you give globally, you might have 100, 1,000 times more impact on well-being, but that will be perhaps at the loss of someone you otherwise would have helped. But I mean those are the kind of trade-offs that are there. But I mean, I see this as an enormous opportunity that, like, we want to kind of, most of our charity goes to people we kind of don't know and will never meet. But if you're prepared to take an impartial view and think globally, you can have a large difference to people's well-being. And I think everyone's well-being matters as much as anyone else's. Thank you.